Hello, once again. Welcome to Escaping Dystopia. My name is Wall. I will be your host. Today is May 1st, 2019. It's been an interesting month. Living through this little bit of history has been odd. Especially as someone who follows politics, as it were. This last little bit has been interesting. In the last few days, we've seen a number of unprecedented activities. We'll talk a little bit about those here in a minute. The Mueller Report has now, the redacted version has now come out. Roughly 40% of the 440-something pages were redacted. I've been reading through it over the last couple weeks when I can find some time. There's some really interesting stuff that I'm going to read about. That's going to be a big part of the show tonight. So, one of the things that I'll talk about is what happened. What has happened over the last month has been very odd because the Attorney General of the United States came out and had a press conference to talk about this report. And he included in that kind of some summary information, kind of. But the thing is, he literally later, like the next day, told Congress that it wasn't a summary. It was just covering highlights. He, today, testified in front of the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, and Lindsey Graham actually helped protect him from getting too many questions. And why did you say that when you did that? Stop, he's out of time! Anyway, sorry, Lindsey Graham always gets me. He has refused now and rescinded his offer to testify in front of the House tomorrow. So this is setting up another little thing. The Republicans actually last time around found Eric Holder in contempt of Congress, so we'll find that. That's probably going to happen pretty quickly with Bob Barr. We'll get to that in a little bit. There's a lot of fun stuff to talk about that. And I'm going to read some of the report, too. Because it's the way that our media has been portraying this is interesting because there's some odd caveats that need to be added to certain statements that have been said quite a bit. Before we get to that, I'm going to do a little bit, spend some time with myself here on Spaceship Earth talking about this. If you come in later and want to go to the Mueller stuff, you can go probably about halfway through and just fast forward. So the Spaceship Earth thing, I wanted to talk a little bit about Boyle's Law and gun violence. If you're not familiar with it, there actually is a scientific law that was figured out in the 17th, 18th century. I needed to be a little bit more specific on this. I was doing some quick research earlier. And it has to do with how pressure and volume and temperature work for an ideal gas. And essentially the idea that and it's a very straightforward concept, but as, volume increases, if you keep the same temperature, your density goes down. Your pressure goes down. And pressure essentially is, your gas molecules bouncing back and forth. And then as you, decrease the volume, pressure has to go up, or temperature to compensate. And it's the relationship of those three factors always together, each one as they're changing and balancing out one another. And so I think about that kind of stuff because a lot of the philosophy that the whole Spaceship Earth idea is based on is very physics and mathematical minded. And this law, Boyle's Law, is really straightforward. And it's one of those that's, when you look at it, and it's fun for a couple things. One, because it's the perfect parabola that we see when things work right. But if you look up, and it's got a fun pun because the whole idea here is how pressure and temperature and volume interact, and it's named after a guy here in America whose last name is Boyle. It's Boyle, by the way, Boyle's Law. And there's actually, there's another French guy who helped him do this, and in France it's known by a different name. But anyway, here in the U.S., we go by Boyle's Law. So how does this relate to gun violence? And that was the thing that I was thinking about today. Because in the U.S., there's about 30,000 gun deaths per year. which is, an absurdly high number, I know. Of those, and this is one of the weird things about this whole, the gun control discussion, because a lot of people will throw out that number, which is a very high number, and then they'll talk about, but of those 30,000 or so, roughly 20,000, or about 2/3 of the gun deaths every year in the U.S. are suicides. This, to me, speaks to the availability of guns being involved here. And this is actually, the U.S. has a fairly high suicide rate related to this. Now, so that's 30,000 of those 20,000 that are suicides. So you got about 10,000 left. Of those 10,000, roughly 10% of those are when you get into the teenage deaths. And that's the stuff that people are really concerned about for gun control. But of those deaths, when you start to look at teenage gun death homicides, you find the majority of those are gang-related. So how does this relate to Boyle's law? And in the U.S., the way that we are set up now, and this goes back to the big theme that I'm always talking about, is our income disparity. And that income, the availability of money, is that pressure, right? And when you don't have that kind of pressure, you use something else to compensate, to create the kind of things you need to get movement, right? That's the whole idea with this pressure and move. I mean, this is how car engines work, like the internal combustion engine. You make pressure, it moves the thing, it comes back down, right? To have movement and to do work, you have to use these pressures. And so we have this situation here where we have a large number of our society where there's not any power that exists. And there's not any social or political power that exists, that is there for anybody to wield. And that is where these vacuums come. And that's one of the things, this is why one of the things, like, there's no way to solve this problem without solving the environment that creates it. And the way that we do that is dealing with the income inequity directly. And I think these kind of things, and this is actually a big part of the whole Spaceship Earth kind of philosophy, is looking at these natural laws that we see and seeing how, because we are, at our essence, this energy that lives here. And we act like this, and we pay attention to these laws, and they affect our behavior. And there's a whole section in the book and about, the notion of how, at least in the moment, the morality that we see is based on the options that exist for us, the pressure on our existence, on our survival. With the high survival pressure, your moral options expand tremendously because survivability is that highest, right? Unless you have another, and I can think of, scenarios where we can set other words ahead of that. But generally, in that sense, surviving is what you want. So, we need to get better as a society, because, 20,000 a year, it's sad and disturbing, and that's why, you'll see sometimes when I have gun discussions, I'll mention that to particularly emphatic gun aficionados, that people usually use guns on themselves, like 2/3 of them. That's most of the deaths. All right, so the Mueller Report. What? So this has been crazy because we had the Attorney General, and you have to remember the other Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, recused himself from Russia. He's in the report. They investigated him. The deputy, Rod Rosenstein, has turned out to be pretty much total coward, if not some sort of weird kind of some plant. Because again, he was appointed by Trump. So anyway, Bob Barr was then, he's the one who replaced Sessions just not very long ago. I think it was in mid-March, so a couple months, like 6 weeks. And then the Mueller report finished. And then Mueller sent it to Barr. Then 2 days later, Barr released his summary. His summary, now that we could see the report, was crazy. It was like really just didn't make much sense if you look at the report itself. And now, in the last couple days, it has come out that Mueller himself wrote a letter to Barr protesting his characterization of their investigation and the work that they've done. Because Barr basically said that it came out and cleared the president of collusion, which the Mueller report, and about this collusion thing, and I want to make this perfectly clear because Mueller does this. Read the report in the first few pages. We were never investigating collusion. It's a made-up term. What? So that they're looking at is a criminal conspiracy, right? There are actually terms, what do you call terms of art in actual criminal justice. So there was never an investigation for collusion. So anyway, to say that they were cleared for something they were never being investigated for is a very odd formulation of how we understand what happened. But the report is big, and it covers a lot of stuff. And one of the big things that it covers is crimes. And one of the big crimes that happened in 2016 was an attack on our election and our democracy by Russia. And it talks about how they did this. This has been, from my perspective, one of the most frustrating, like, what the hell, guys? Are we going to talk about this? Parts of this, because the entire campaign for this was real, and it had a real effect and a real goal. And since it was so effective that it worked, and the people it was supporting put in power, they have not been able to really acknowledge that that's what put them in power. And this is one, and Kirstjen Nielsen, she just resigned from the Homeland Security because it's impossible to do what they want to do with the laws that we have, which should scare people. But anyway, so, oh shoot, oh my gosh. Sorry, I was reading something else. I had to get the drink. Kirstjen Nielsen, talking about this, she's director of Homeland Security for the United States, and she wouldn't acknowledge that the attack on our election had a real purpose. It had a goal, and that was to help Republicans win. And that's one of the things that Barr redacted from the report pretty clearly. And there's places where you still see it come through, because a lot of the stuff that's in the troll section, and I want to look at page 18 of the Mueller report, and it is completely redacted, the whole page. And there's one footnote you can read, and it says, the term troll refers to internet users, in this context, paid operatives who post inflammatory or otherwise disruptive content on social media or other websites. So, you need to understand something, and this is something I guess that a lot of people don't quite get. I've been online and doing online community stuff and participating and commenting and doing this stuff for 20 freaking plus years, man. I'm almost 30. I mean, I started doing this in my teenagers on a BBS, to give you, this kind of dates me. But, so I've been doing this for a while. So I, have a good sense of how people communicate online. I'm a pretty good writer, and, I can do a bunch of different voices and all kind of different stuff. And I mean, I've read, back in the day, again, I was a teenage, hacker or whatever, and, I've read treatises on types of trolling. And I know how effective it can be to disrupt conversation, how effective it can be to push ideas into a community, and how utterly destructive it can be in a community. And I've seen all of these things happen, and I watched this happen over and over and over again in 2016 on Facebook. And I did, and I was as far as social media goes, I was a pretty dedicated Facebook user at that time. But having this team, and you would see these same accounts and these same people that were like, either, and some of them were a little bit clear that they were a little bit sketchier than others. But, every news story, ABC, NBC, CBS, the New York Times, Washington Post, that's only 10 places. And every time a news story comes out, that's only 10 things. So it's not that much work to actually put an idea or a concept or disrupt or change a conversation 10 times a day. That's 100 posts. That's one person could do that, and you have these teams of 10, 100 people all over the place mimicking accounts. They go into how they organize protests, how they have hundreds of thousands of followers. Like, I mean, this is kind of one of those things, like, wait, if I had hundreds of thousands of followers, I would do this, like, this would be my job, because that's enough to sustain this kind of thing, right? And when you have those resources, I don't know, maybe I should just buy some advertising or something, but and Kushner tried to do this and tried to downplay the size and extent of this operation, where it was every story on every social media website they were involved in. Every single one. When they talked about their reach, they talk about 120 plus million Americans. That's how many people voted. I mean, if you voted in the U.S. election and you use the internet and social media, you interacted at some level with this stuff. It talks about, and it goes into this, says U.S. media outlets also quoted tweets from IRA-controlled accounts and attributed them to the reactions of real U.S. persons. Now, I want to make that clear. U.S. media outlets, and this is directly from the Mueller Report, talking about the illegal conspiracy to defraud the United States. U.S. media outlets also quoted tweets from IRA-controlled accounts and attributed them to the reactions to real U.S. persons. So you have these fake accounts having real reactions that were then amplified by actual real media websites and then shared again. That's how pervasive it was. It was everywhere. Everywhere. And that's one of the things that a lot of the FBI people are kind of like, everybody needs to know this. And even Rosenstein was like, people need to, obviously it's great the public knows, but the public doesn't know this. The public doesn't know how pervasive this stuff was, and that it's all to help Republicans and tear apart Democrats. And it's so easy to do this kind of stuff if people give you the legitimacy of being a legitimate account and having a legitimate opinion. A single person can just dominate and destroy a community. And a team doing it together, if you're not trying to fight this, you have no chance. People do not understand. I found this headline, and it was DC Leaks was one of the websites that they used to distribute some of this stuff. And there was a headline on the Drudge Report talking about how this website was down for the morning, right? They're following this stuff enough and repeating this that they even repeat that it's not available. So, they're totally with this and use this a lot. Let me see, it says, among the U.S. leaders of public opinion targeted by the IRA were various members and surrogates of the Trump campaign. In total, Trump campaign affiliates promoted dozens of tweets, posts, and other political content created by the IRA. So, that's one of the things that they repeat and go over this over and over in the report is how they did work with Russians and they did collude and they did some of this stuff. And some of it was as innocent, I guess, as just repeating internet troll stuff that was created by Russian trolls. And it was just so good, they just reshared it. And lots of Americans did this. And that's what's so dangerous about this whole story. And that's what really puts it into, for me at least, that dystopian level. Because you can't trust the thing that you're interacting with. And Facebook is trying to get a handle on it, but it's, they talk about how, corporations have some of the resources of governments and all that, but kind of not really, though. So, anyway, there's some other stuff here. And this is the part here that really gets to where and how they didn't charge them. And when people claim that, there weren't charges for the Trump campaign for colluding, let me read to you what the report says about why there are not charges. There's two things. Although members of the IRA had contact with individuals affiliated with the Trump campaign, the indictment does not charge any Trump campaign official or any other U.S. person with participating in the conspiracy. The conspiracy that existed, that the Russians used to influence her, that was real, and it influenced our election. This is because the investigation did not identify evidence that any U.S. person who coordinated or communicated with the IRA knew that he or she was speaking with Russian nationals engaged in the criminal conspiracy. Let me repeat that. The reason we are not charging them is because the investigation did not identify evidence that any person who did do this knew they did this, knew they were working with Russians at the time. And the office therefore determined that such persons did not have the knowledge or criminal purpose required to charge them in a conspiracy to defraud the United States. That's the count one. That's the first part of volume one. Or in the separate count alleging wire and tax bank fraud conspiracy involving the IRA and two individual Russian nationals. So the bank fraud stuff was because they came over here and bought IDs and used some fake accounts. They financed a lot of this through Bitcoin. This is in the report. It's pretty wild stuff. There's some interesting intelligence stuff, and some of the stuff that's redacted is intelligence, gathering techniques. Some of the stuff that's redacted is totally to protect Republicans, because the idea, again, of the troll campaign was to tear apart the Democrats from the inside and prop up Trump. And that was it. And it was a two-pronged thing from that sense. And it's not like, again, this isn't simplistic, just something else. This is somebody on every account acting like that uber conservative douchebag or that total asshole Bernie bro. A lot of those were Russians or, affiliated with us, trained to play that role. And when you see someone else doing it, that engenders the same type of activity. And this is why it's so destructive. On every, article that Robert Reich posted about Hillary Clinton, you would see the same kind of thing. And at the time after the campaign, when there should have been this consolidation, right, of opinion that would happen through online discussion, honest online discussion, as people all realize, hey, that was tough, but let's go forward. And while you're trying to do that, and you've got some douchebag over there just, no, man, real progressives, we can still take this. And that was the trolls. Those were the Russian trolls. It's not like they were not real people, because they did and left, and they probably had American. That's how it works. And you do that, and it's over and over and over and over and over. And the thing is, you can act like when you're intentionally doing this kind of stuff, you can amplify your own voice to be 100 or 1,000 people, like you are acting as if you are that many. Because the way people you automatically learn to gauge online discussion, because not everybody participates, and those who do, but it's percentages of each one, right? So many people read the article, so many people comment, so many people, and it's a cut down of each one. But when you jump to that immediate end, the most refined, least likely thing someone is to do is engage and comment on something. But when you are doing that automatically because that's what you are paid to be doing, right? Whereas one or two comments would represent 100 people having read this thing and interacting with it. The trolls, one or two comments is just one. So that interaction between that post and interaction ratio is sky high, nearly 1,000%. Right? Whereas most people would just read and browse and move on. But no, these people are driven with a purpose. So you can amplify hugely. I still don't think people really understand how pervasive this was and how effective the tactic is. And that was one of the things that drew me to Facebook originally, was that you didn't have that anonymity that allows this. Because I had seen over and over again how it would just tear apart crap. And it did it to our country. So, anyway, they couldn't prove that they knew they were working with Russians. They were definitely conspiring with other people, but we couldn't prove that they knew that they were working with people who were involved in this criminal conspiracy for which you've got these 89 indictments out there or whatever. So Volume 2. And this will go pretty quick, because the Volume 2, I can tell you in one sentence the gist of Volume 2. And it's the one sentence from Barr. And it says, accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. So, prior to that sentence, Robert Mueller lays out the notion that the president can't really commit a crime because the president is... that doesn't work. You can't really... it's by saying that, what they did was say, we're not going to charge. We've agreed that we're not going to charge the president with a crime because you can't indict a sitting president per justice policy. We can't, even accusing, in this sense, the president of a crime from the Justice Department is so biasing against him that it becomes a political act on our part. We don't want to do that, so we're not going to charge the president. We just don't do it. So that's when it says... accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, because we decided at the outset we were never going to charge him with a crime. This is what the part 2, and why Barr claiming that, no, I've decided, Mueller said that it's up to me to decide if the president obstructed justice, and I said it didn't. That's not what Mueller's saying at all. And Mueller's had no part of that whatsoever. Mueller lays out this, and is pretty clear that the people who are to determine if this is something needs to happen about, is Congress. And he lays out pretty clearly a number of situations that are pretty textbook obstruction of justice, and some that are kind of sketchy, and a couple that aren't. And a couple that were just the president lying his ass off. And that's what Volume 2 is the president lying his ass off about a lot of stuff, ordering people to do things that they ignore. This is the really embarrassing stuff. He's claiming none of this has happened, which makes a number of people just felon liars. So that's what Volume 2 is. But that sentence, accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, because we can't, excuse me, it also does not exonerate him. Which is saying, because he's the president, we're not going to charge him with a crime, but we can't clear him we can't say that he didn't commit crimes. Which is a roundabout way of saying that the president clearly committed crimes. And that thing, that's why this has been so strange. Because Barr has taken that and pushed into the public eye the notion that that sentence clears the president. That sentence does not clear him whatsoever. That is at the bottom of a paragraph absolutely condemning the president. And that's why Mueller had to write the letter to Barr. So this is far from over. I'm going to finish my show right now because I could just talk about this for a while. But the report is very, very damning of what the president has done. It didn't charge his campaign with a crime because they couldn't prove that his campaign knew they were conspiring with Russia. It has charged a number of people from the campaign lying about working with Russia, lying about contacts with Russia, lying about coordination with them, but they couldn't find that they were as well aware of how big and how pervasive this conspiracy was, and it did go all the way to the top in Russia, and how their data that they were providing to them was being used. Remember, they were giving them their polling data that these trolls were then using Facebook to target people, individual people, in individual places, in individual conversations. That's how pervasive it was. So, Barr's in pretty big trouble with Congress. We're going to see what's going to happen with that. Hopefully more of this report will be digested. It's very difficult for our news media to communicate well, and even like nearly impossible in situations where they've already communicated something and then need to correct it, which in this case was communicating Barr's summary as if it were an accurate representation of the Mueller report, which it was not, according to Robert Mueller. And with that, we shall bid you adieu. Have a wonderful week. Thanks anybody who dropped by, and I'll see you later.